Hello everyone, and welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm James Milan, and we are talking zoning recodification today. We have with us David Watson. David is a local business owner, but more importantly for our purposes today, he's doing triple duty in what is currently going on, which is the final stages of the zoning recodification process. David is not just a member of the Zoning Recodification Task Force, but he is also a member of Arlington Redevelopment Board, ARB, and a town meeting member. Right now we are tracing, again, the final stages of the zoning recodification going to town meeting, and we wanted to talk to David specifically about his role in the zoning recodification process, and also answer some questions that still are out there about the process itself and about what the impact will be for Arlingtonians. So first of all, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
Good to be here.
Always appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in this process in so many different ways.
From a town meeting perspective, I'm finishing up my fourth year on town meeting, and zoning has come up several times over the 4 years that I've been a town meeting member, and so it was something that had piqued my interest from that perspective. In the fall of 2016, I was appointed to the redevelopment board. And as part of my duties there, I became the ARB's representative on the Zoning Recodification Working Group, which through the Master Plan Implementation Committee is underneath the ARB. And so there needed to be a representative from the board. And since I had an interest in zoning, both as a town meeting member and professionally, I took that on. And so I've been working on the recodification process for approximately a year at this point.
So as always, want to first of all express our appreciation, our collective appreciation for your taking that time. And you yourself told me before we went on camera, I think that this is, you know, of all the stuff that you've been involved with in town so far, this has been the most labor-intensive thing, I think you said?
Absolutely. You know, even though I've been a town meeting member and I'm a redevelopment board member, just in terms of the sheer amount of work, I've done more work on the zoning working group than I think everything else I've done for the town combined. And you know, like all the other members of the working group, I'm a volunteer, so I'm choosing to do this, you know, for the good of the community. You know, despite having other things I need to do professionally and personally.
Right. So thank you for that, and let's actually delve into that a little bit more. With this much work to be done, with this large a task in front of you, obviously you guys needed to divide it up in some way, to divide that work up. So tell us a little bit about what your particular sphere was in terms of looking at the old bylaws and making the new ones.
Sure. Well, while everyone on the working group has had the opportunity to look at the entirety of each draft that has been produced during the process, we realized pretty early on that to really give each section the attention that it needed, we had to divide and conquer. So all of us took on responsibility for certain sections of the document, and those became our real focal points. So for me, that was the parking section.
And what did you choose that? Were you didn't get your hand up or down, or leave it down fast enough? How did that come?
Oh, I chose that. I was excited to take on parking because it is something that factors into my work professionally as a transportation planner. So I was more than happy to look at the parking sections.
There continues to be, whether justified or not, a general perception out there that, and perhaps perception is the wrong word, but some Arlingtonians, I think, seem to fear that something has happened in the zoning recodification process that is about substance, that is about policy, and that it may have happened with through great efforts, but also out of, without people being able to have a chance to weigh in and to know what's going on, and et cetera. So I invite you to, as somebody involved with the process all the way through, to clarify for our viewers just what this has been all about and how it has come about, in combat perhaps some misperceptions out there.
Well, I think one way to approach that question is to compare it to the process that happened in 1975. And what happened in 1975 was a much more extensive process where not only was the bylaw being reorganized and updated, but lots of substantive changes were being made to guide the future of development in Arlington. And it needed to be changed because there were new types of development, like the larger buildings that we see along Mass Ave that were being proposed in that era. And what we're doing today is a much less intensive process. We are just doing the reorganization part, and we've taken about a year to do just that part of it. The substantive issues, like changing the allowable uses in different districts, or issues involving tear downs, which some people have expressed concern about, or even coming back to parking, changing our parking minimum requirements or bike parking requirements or anything like that. None of that is part of this process. And we have made every effort to make sure that we didn't unintentionally make a change in the drafting process that would affect any of those things. And we've all done our best to make sure that didn't happen. And we've all along invited the public through the various means that we've given them to provide feedback to us, to let us know if they see anything in the proposed draft that causes them concern or that they believe is a substantive change, because we aren't intending to make those changes. And if somehow something crept in, we want to know about it.
Can you give us some idea from your, the part of the bylaws that you were working with related to parking, what kinds of things you needed to do in order to make this, in order to update them, the bylaws in the ways that you intended? So
in the parking section, for instance, we wanted to make it more clear how the process worked for getting approval for parking and for understanding what the parking requirements were for a variety of different projects, both residential and commercial. So we added some more explanation around the existing policy framework. So we didn't change the policy, but we added some more explanation in the introductory sections about how does it work. When do you have to go to the redevelopment board or the zoning board of appeals, and that kind of thing. We also looked at the tables that tell you how much parking you need for different uses, whether those are residential or commercial, and clean them up, organize them into sections that made sense. So related uses were grouped together very clearly. Also removed redundant uses. Sometimes we referred to the same use in different ways, which was confusing. There were some outdated uses, which, in today's Arlington just don't exist anymore. And there were some inconsistencies just in terminology between some of the definitions in the bylaw and what was actually in the tables. So we cleaned all that up, so now everything is much more consistent and hopefully much more clear for people to understand.
And all of this is going, as we've alluded to a few times, to town meeting, to a special town meeting in mid-February. And so town meeting members will be, in the end, voting yay or nay on these changes, or this updating, I should say. How has the process proceeded in terms of town meeting members, given that they're going to be having to review quite a voluminous document? Have they had a chance to also to be weighing in on this process, over the last year and a half that you've been at it?
Sure. Well, just like any other member of the public, the town meeting members could come to any of the either public meetings or even just the regular meetings of the zoning working group. And there was at least one member of the public who participated regularly, but it was always open to anyone who wanted. I know that the planning department has had a number of open houses, many of them in the evening, to try to give people the opportunity to ask any questions. And then 3 of us on the working group who are town meeting members wanted to do some additional direct outreach to the town meeting members to make sure they understood that this process was going on, what the scope of it was, what it included and what it did not include, and then to gauge what they understood about the process and what else they might need to help them make an informed decision should this come before town meeting. And to that end, we sent a survey to all 252 town meeting members back in November by both email and regular mail, since we didn't have email addresses for everyone. And we got about 20% of the town meeting members responding, and got a wide range of feedback showing varying degrees of awareness of the process. So we felt it was worthwhile that we had done it, since we had at least now we knew for sure that everybody was now aware of the process, having received the survey, and also people expressing specific concerns, some of which were concerns that are appropriately addressed in this recodification process, and some which are more appropriately addressed in a future, more substantive policy discussion. So we compiled all those responses and gave them to the planning department, and they're keeping a record of all of those topics that people have raised for future discussion. And then just last month in December, we sent another letter to the town meeting members, just making sure they were fully aware of the timeline of both tonight's hearing and the upcoming 4 neighborhood meetings, as well as the date for the special town meeting on February 12th.
What I'd like to do, though, is see if we can't look at the documents a little bit together, the old bylaws, the guide that you've provided to the new recodification, and then the new document itself, and just maybe help people see in concrete form what some of the changes are that you've been describing to us. So,
sure, I'm happy to walk through that, and just recognizing that It is a fair amount of work to go into this level of detail, and we're asking a lot of the town meeting members to do that. So I'm happy to give some examples to help them get a feel for how to do that.
All right, well, why don't we do that then? All right, so it looks like we're looking at the pertinent section, the parking section, with the old bylaws, if I'm correct, on the left there, and then the new version on the right.
Yeah, so in the current bylaw, the parking and loading regulations are contained in Article 8, which you see here on the left. And in the proposed bylaw, they are contained in Section 6, which is called Site Development Standards, and then Section 6.1, which is off-street parking. As you can see, just side by side, just even visually, they're pretty different.
Yes.
So in order to help people navigate those changes, we created this document, which is the guide, and it actually explains for each section what the existing section is, and so this is 8.01, which is what we were looking at on the left side of the other screen, and then looking at section 6.1 and its subsections, which is where the new introductory sections are in the proposed bylaw, and then explaining the nature of the changes and then the purpose for which those changes would be made. And in the parking section, it was, and throughout the document really, it was really primarily for usability so that people could be able to pick up the document and find what they needed much more efficiently than they can today.
As you've mentioned, yes. So I see that the guide presents in those 5 different columns. If we skip the second column, because that's really, it's fairly self-evident. What you're doing there is the current bylaw section all the way on the left, and then guiding people to where to find that in the new bylaws, but or in the proposed. But I think. Probably as importantly for everybody who has taken an interest in this so far is that column, the amendment summary, in which you're making very clear on a section by section basis if there were any changes made at all, what they were, and people have a chance in a kind of digest form here to be able to see. Whether in fact this is an updating and a reorganization, or a hidden policy change, which clearly it isn't.
So the guide was created actually by the working group, not by the consultant, and it was in direct response to feedback we received from the public at some of the earlier public meetings, where people wanted this level of information about how you would map the current sections to the proposed sections and exactly what was being changed and why. And largely because of the amount of work that was necessary to create this document in response to the public request, we ended up having to lengthen the entire process several months. So that's how we ended up moving from the initial proposal of having this considered by a special town meeting in the fall of 2017 to now we're in the winter of 2018, and the town meeting will be in February. It was something that came up repeatedly in public comments, and we just felt like it was too important to just let it slide. So we took it on and created the document. And just to explain a little bit about how this is organized, you may notice on the left-hand column here, section 8.01 is referenced several times. And that's because in the course of reorganizing things to make them more clear, different parts of section 8.01 got put into different subsections of what is now section 6.1. And we want to be very clear where exactly things went.
Yeah, we can see the level of specificity right there, where you're saying that the first two sentences of 8.01 were incorporated in 6.1.1.
Right, and then the last sentence was actually moved to 6.1.3b. So we wanted to try to make it clear where things went, so people wouldn't think that things just went missing if they couldn't find them where they used to be. But the way the paragraph was organized, there kind of a lot going on in this introductory paragraph, and then it immediately dove into this table of parking regulations without any explanation of kind of how the process worked, or really clearly why you have to go through this process. So we wrapped the existing policy framework in some more clear explanation in these introductory sections here.
And I wonder if I might ask you to show us what the new table looks like, because I did notice we've been doing some of our own research here, and this is how a lot of this is laid out, and it's not very clear.
No, so a lot of things are roughly where they were in the proposal. When you compare the current bylaw to the proposal, a lot of things haven't actually moved, but we've reorganized things. Like here, there are no subsections grouping similar uses together, and over on the right side in the proposed bylaw, you now see we have a little residential uses section, we have a business or industrial use section, institutional or educational use down here. So we've grouped those similar uses together so it's easier to just jump to the section that you need to go to rather than looking through the whole thing. We've also moved a few things. So they haven't been removed from the table, but in doing this grouping, we realized that some things needed to be moved. So, for instance, we have a new section down here called Public, Recreational, or Entertainment, and contained within that is theater, restaurant, gym, auditorium, etc. Whereas in the original table on the left here, that was just kind of a standalone thing right near the beginning, and not associated with any other related uses. So we were just trying to make it more clear.
And providing a context for people, again, just making it easier to search and find, by using categories in addition to, specific language that somebody could search.
And one thing that's very important to note is when you look at the actual requirements in the right-hand column of each table, they're the same. We didn't change those. Because that's a substantive decision to decide whether to change the parking requirements. We did correct some inconsistencies. For instance, here where I'm pointing on the right, you can see this reference to gross floor area, and we use that term repeatedly. You can see it in line after line. But over in the original, the current bylaw, here's a reference to gross floor space. Here's a reference to floor space.
More floor space, then floor space again, then gross floor space.
And here's a reference to gross floor area. So we've got at least three different terms being used for the same thing. In the current bylaw, and so over in the new one, the proposed one, we changed that all to be gross floor area so that it's entirely consistent with across all the different uses.
Let me ask you one last question, and that is, what's clear from the what I would call unwieldy nature of the current bylaws is that this is an iterative process, that it is constantly being updated, amended. It is not going to stay in a static form. So therefore, you are reorganizing everything and starting anew, in a sense, with a reorganized presentation of the bylaws. Did you try and stay mindful in this process? Is it possible to be mindful that there are going to be further iterations in the future, and you wanted to is it possible to set things up in a way to make it easier for people to make amendments, or for future for amendments to be made in the future and fit within the structure that you have?
So I want to be very clear. We don't want to make it easier to make amendments. There's a robust process in place that requires layers of approval from the working group to the ARB to town meeting in order to make a zoning change. And it's important that that multi-layered approach, which creates safeguards against making mistakes, stay in place. What the recodification does do is, and this was very intentional, is reorganize things into a framework so that if changes need to be made, it is much more clear how to incorporate those changes into the bylaw than it is today. But it in no way removes any safeguards or actually makes the process of making a change any easier. It just makes it easier to figure out where to put the change in the bylaw itself.
And that was exactly my question.
The intention was that there might be situations today where if you wanted to make a significant change to zoning, you might have to actually make changes in 2 or 3 or 4 different sections. And then in the future, if any further changes to those sections needed to be made, you had to make sure it complicated keeping them consistent.
Right.
So the hope is that with the proposed bylaw, that the new structure would let you make changes in, maybe only 1 or 2 places to achieve the same ends that would have required more changes in the current bylaw, and would then be easier to maintain consistency as the zoning bylaw continues to evolve, which it certainly will. Mm-hmm. And so we want to build a very good foundation that will allow our bylaw to evolve, through the existing robust process that we have as the needs of the town and thinking on zoning change over time.
I just want to close by thanking you one more time for taking the time today, because we've spent quite a bit of time and gotten into some of the, I think important details that kind of show people what it is that what was required of you and that you took on and that you have produced in the end. So appreciate your taking the time to explain this to us today and kind of guide us through it. And then also for the time that you've spent 4 years at town meeting, and certainly this last year and a half of very intensive work with this. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
For Talk of the Town, here with the current and proposed bylaws in front of us, I've been with David Watson, and we appreciate your being with us, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.